Exciting.
Well, wait till we talk about it. It's pretty cool. So
Okay.
this is Notes On with Travis and Ross, where we try to do Christ intentionally, on purpose, not just drift around. And Travis, I have a PowerPoint that I put together on near-death experiences and how they relate to the Christian faith. There's a lot of material out there now, but right now on podcasts and books, it's been a thing for quite a while. But there's a few points that a lot of people aren't making that have a lot to do, I think, with defeating naturalism and the reality of the spiritual world and how we can relate to our Christian faith. So I've got a PowerPoint that I've got up. If you're in control of it, however, so why don't you bring up the first slide?
One of the scariest things in the world is that I'm in control of anything.
Yeah, I know. I had to say a prayer before we went on. Make sure keep you tuned up.
Oops. There we go.
There we go. That's good.
I cut you out.
So I already told everybody what we're talking about, but let's treat this like a teaser. There is a piece of evidence, Travis, that defeats naturalism, and it's evidence for a spiritual world. It's evidence for angels and spiritual beings. It's evidence for an afterlife. It's evidence for God. And I think I can do this. It's easy to understand, and that is near-death experiences and how they relate to the Christian faith. So I already said that this evidence is easy to understand. And I think even more importantly, Travis, I've been thinking about this for a lot of years, and I don't see how this evidence can be defeated. I think it's about as tight a line of evidence for the defeat of naturalism, especially for the fact that we live in a world that is not all atoms and molecules. I think the only way that a skeptic can argue against this is to just say, I don't believe any of it. I think it's all made up. Yeah. But there's hundreds and thousands of examples now. And so let's get into some of this. I want to tell a story, and this is a true story. This woman here, Pam Reynolds, she was a singer-songwriter from your neck of the woods down there in Atlanta.
I remember her.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
She was born in the greatest year of the 20th century, 1956, which was my birth year as well. And in 1991, at the age of 35, she started to suffer from some pretty severe dizziness and loss of speech. She had some difficulty moving. She went to her doctor. They did a CAT scan, and it was really bad news. She had not just an aneurysm, but a really large aneurysm, and not just in her brain, but buried down really deep in her brain where it was almost inoperable. Her doctor said you basically have zero chance of survival. Normal methods of getting rid of the aneurysm were not available for those two reasons. It was really large, and it was buried right at the bottom of the brain in a section of the brain that surgeons don't like to operate on. And somehow she was referred to Dr. Robert Spitzer in Phoenix, who was pioneering at that time a really radical procedure called hypothermic cardiac arrest. And it's a really extreme procedure, but it's the only one that would give her a chance for surgery to get rid of the aneurysm. And here's what they did. First thing they did was they put tape over both eyes so she couldn't see anything. Second was they put these two noise generators in her ears. And this is all after she's been anesthetized. This is while she's on the operating table. At 90 decibels, it clicked like 2 times a second. And the reason they did that was so that they could tell from her brain waves if she was hearing anything. It's a way of telling if the patient is truly completely out. And then they also blocked the ear canals. So the only thing she could have heard, even if she had been awake, would have been the 90 decibel clicks. They cooled her body to 60 degrees. They stopped the heartbeat. They stopped the breathing. There was no brain activity, and the brainstem shut down. And then, sounds crazy, they opened a artery in her leg, and they tilted her body and drained all the blood out of her upper body, her brain and her torso. And the reason they did that is because once that's done, then the aneurysm, which is like a balloon, well, all of a sudden, right, there's no blood there's nothing in the balloon. So like a deflated balloon, they can just go in there and pull it out. And the operation was a complete and total success. But she was clinically dead for an hour in that state. Okay, body cooled to 60 degrees, no heartbeat, no brain, no breath, no brain waves, tape over her eyes, and there's no way she could hear anything. Now, Pam claimed at that point that she had a near-death experience during that time. She started out with hearing a musical tone. And I'm going to read you a quote, what she said about that. She said, "The further out of my body I got, the more clear the tone became. I had the impression it was like a road, like a frequency that you go on. I remember seeing several things in the operating room when I was looking down. It was the most aware that I think that I have ever been in my entire life." And keep that in mind. That's really key. It was brighter and more focused and clearer than normal vision. There was so much in the operating room that I didn't recognize, and so many people. Now, one of the things that she recognized she claims that she typically, like a lot of people, her spirit, her soul rose up out of her body. And typically you're up like near the ceiling of the operating room looking down at the surgery. She realized she was dead. She said, "That's me down there." But she hung around in the operating room, whether by her own volition or not, you don't really know. But she made several observations, Travis, of what was going on in the operating room, that had she been awake and fully conscious on the table, she wouldn't have been able to hear or experience. One of them was very specific description of a bone saw they used to cut into the back of her head. And she said, this is another quote. She said, "This saw thing looked like an electric toothbrush, and it had a dent in it, a groove at the top where the saw appeared to go into the handle, but it didn't. And the saw had interchangeable blades too, but these blades were in what looked like a socket wrench case. I heard the saw crank up." She also overheard a female nurse say something about her veins and arteries being too small in her leg, and they had to switch to the other leg. Now, there were several other things that she observed about the procedure that, again, she couldn't have known. Now, we're only 10 minutes into this, but this is probably the main point that I want to make. I don't think we're going to get through this in one podcast, but if people just remember this one point, it is that this seems to me to be really hard and fast evidence that we are not just a materialistic body. We're not just matter and energy. We are more than that. Like traditional, religion teaches, Christianity teaches, we have a soul that can be separate from the body. And in this case, in many cases with near-death experiences, it seems like her center of consciousness, if that, for lack of a better word, was above her body, observing things that she couldn't have observed any other way. She even recalled, this is really ironic, at the end of the procedure, in the operating room, they were playing Hotel California. And that line, you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave, seemed kind of appropriate.
Yeah.
She gave the doctor a hard time about playing that, and of course the doctor was shocked that she knew they were playing it. But let me read a paragraph so you get an idea. I've got like a page and a half of another quote that she read, or that she said about the experience itself. She said, "There was a sensation like being pulled, but not against your will. I was going on my own accord because I wanted to go. I have different metaphors to try to explain this. It was like the Wizard of Oz, being taken up in a tornado vortex, only you're not spinning around like you've got vertigo. You're very focused and you have a place to go. The feeling was like going up in an elevator real fast, and there was a sensation, but it wasn't a bodily physical sensation. It was like a tunnel, but it wasn't a tunnel." And she's got several more paragraphs, but this is typical of what out-of-body experience, people who have an out-of-body experience, this is typical of the kinds of things they experience. And let's see, one other thing. I think, well, like I said, the surgery was a success. She came back into her body, and she wound up dying of heart failure in 2010.
When was the surgery?
Surgery was in 91. Okay. She was 35.
So she basically had 20 more years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, do you have anything you want to say at this point before I go to the next slide?
I'll save what I'd like to say for a little bit later. Let's look at the next case.
Okay. So we've talked about a person who had a near-death experience, but let's define what an NDE is. I'm calling it an unusual experience taking place on the brink of death and recounted by a person after recovery, typically an out-of-body experience or a vision of a tunnel of light. There's a lot of variation in that. Some people don't have out-of-body experiences, but it's still called an NDE. No two NDEs are alike, but there are commonalities. And I don't know if we're going to get to that today, but we will be able to get to it the next time we do it. It's one of the things in my mind that supports the idea that this is real. This is real stuff. Let's go to the next. Well, no, let's talk about this. So there's a little bit of history of NDEs. In the ancient world, they were extremely rare. Plato talks about it. Democritus talks about it. But the reason there's so many now is because we have the ability to resuscitate people when they're on the verge of death, in many cases. And somewhere around 25 to 30% of people who are brought back, who are resuscitated, claim to have some kind of near-death experience. Right now, this is a burgeoning business, I'll tell you. There's many, many accounts. There's dozens of books. It's becoming a real serious field of study. There's even a peer-reviewed journal on near-death experiences. Yeah. And there's so many cases, thousands and thousands and thousands, that it's really difficult to ignore. It's at first, when I first heard about them, 15 years ago, I really kind of discounted them because I just kept thinking, well, you don't know what the brain's doing when it's dying. It could be an hallucination or a dream kind of thing. But Travis, some of these are veridical. Some of these are what we talked about, where the patient experiences claims to perceive things about the real world that could not have been perceived even if they were awake on the operating table. And I think we can make the case that that's not a dream. That they must be experiencing the real world just from a different perspective.
Mm.
And this is what confirms these stories, and in my mind, makes it more likely that the unverifiable parts of the near-death experiences are probably true as well. Excuse me, Travis, I got a cough here. I'm going to mute this.
That looked rough.
I'm going to have a near-death experience myself right here.
I was about to say, man,
That
looked like a terrible cough.
It was. I think I've been getting sick. So this is what convinced me that these are real experiences. There's a couple other examples that I'll give. There was one where a woman was on the operating table. She started to die. She claims that she floated out of her body, but she didn't stop at the ceiling. She went up to the roof of the hospital where there was a red tennis shoe.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, and she saw it, she perceived it, she described it. She came back into her body, related it to the nurses and the doctor. They went back up and looked for it, and there it was, exactly how she said it was, where she said it was.
Wasn't it a part of the hospital though where the door was locked and no one had been up in that area of the hospital for years?
That's right. Yeah.
It wasn't, I mean, not only is it extremely unlikely, but it is impossible that anyone in that hospital at that time would have known about that red shoe, save maybe a very old janitor or something. You know, but he's not going to go during. He wouldn't think to go to her and whisper in her ear that, hey, years ago I put a red shoe up at the. I mean, there was just no way that she could have been informed about that. And so most of the stories they get me. I mean, they grab me. I'm like, wow, because just the story you told about Pam, where she is floating around the hospital, the operating room rather, and she's verifying tools used, songs that were sung, all while she's clinically dead.
Right.
And describing things that she could not have described if she were laying there fully aware on the table.
That's right. That's right.
So it's not just that you have someone having an experience like this. Is they're giving information they simply could not have known, even if they were awake.
That's right.
Like even if you have a lady sitting there in a waiting room and someone says, hey, you know what? Someone put a red shoe up this part of the building. Her description of it was perfect. And nobody would think to give the kind of details that she gave. So those are the things that really get me thinking. Obviously, people have these experiences, but the fact that you have so many and you have so many of this caliber, it's not plausible to think that we are just brains, that we're reducible to our matter or our brains.
That's right. That's right. So there's another example that is right in line with what you're saying. This woman, another woman on the operating table, same thing. For whatever reason, she's near death. She floats up out of her body. She notices a really large piece of equipment in the operating room that's taller than a person. It's like 7 or 8 feet tall. And on the top of the equipment is a 12-digit number, like a serial number or a model number or something. And as she recounted it, she said, well, I've got ADD. And when I see a really big number, I have to memorize it. So she memorized this 12-digit number. And when she came back to life, she recounted the number digit for digit to the staff. Now, that's a great example of how she could not have seen that number had she been awake, fully aware on the operating table. So, the point here is a person can't have a made-up dream or hallucination that is factual in every way. The odds of that are ridiculous. If you say you experience something that is related to the real world, it must be because you saw the real thing. I'll give you, I made up a little story here. And so a man says to his wife, I had a vivid dream last night. I walked out of our front door and our next door neighbor, Bob, he was racing down the street in his brand new red Ford pickup. And he was driving so fast, he missed the driveway and totaled his new car on the light post 2 doors down. He and his wife both got out of the car as if nothing happened and walked into their house. A strange dream. I can still hear the impact in my head. It seems so real. And his wife says, that was no dream. Everything you just described actually happened. Now, what are the options at that point? If he dreamed something with that much detail and it exactly matched what really happened, he must have either lied to his wife about having a dream, or he was sleepwalking, or there must be some other explanation for it. And so I think it's the same way with near-death experiences. The typical description of an NDE by people who have them is, and I think this is fascinating, is that they're hyper real. They're more real than the real world.
Right.
And these accurate, detailed descriptions of events that actually happened. And so I want to make kind of the logical case with a couple of questions. The question is, where is the person? Where was Pam Reynolds when she experienced her NDE? Where her body's on the operating table, but where was Pam? It seems like she wasn't in her body. So if during an NDE someone perceives something in some detail that actually happened in real life, doesn't that mean they weren't dreaming or hallucinating, but actually conscious and aware of their surroundings? I think you have to say yes to that. And if their center of consciousness when they observe these things is apart from their physical body, doesn't that mean that we really do have an immaterial soul that is distinct from our body? And if our soul is immaterial but still us, doesn't that mean there really is a spiritual world and naturalism is a failed hypothesis?
Right.
So let's take the rest of the time, Travis, to go to the next slide. And I don't have my buttons anymore. Can you do that? So I want to spend the rest of the time that we have today on this list because this is really important. And chime in on this. So this is what remains of us during an NDE, which is a pretty complete list. So Pam Reynolds and everybody else who has an out-of-body experience that is veridical, where they perceive something in the real world, they say that they see it. But the question for the supernaturalist, the question for the audience is, with what mechanism do they perceive it? Their eyeballs and optic nerves and brain are down on the operating table.
Right.
So there must be something in our immaterial soul that is tuned to the body. The body, we see things with the body through the eyes, the optic nerve that's connected to the brain. But when we're disconnected from the body, we actually have greater perception than we do with the body, as if the body is holding us back somehow.
Right.
We're still conscious. We still have the sound and light show that we do when we wake up every morning. We're still aware of our surroundings. That first person, what's it like to be me? We still have cognitive ability. People are able to say, I realize I'm dead. and they experience what they experience. We still have our personal identity. I think this is a disclaimer for the Eastern religions that say we meld into some, unifying thing or one mind or whatever, whatever they say. Everybody maintains their personal identity. They're still the same person. We also maintain our personality. I found it fascinating, that woman that had ADD that saw that number. Well, she still had the ADD when she was out of body, which means the ADD isn't just a bodily chemical thing. It's part of her basic personality.
Right.
Still have a localized existence. We perceive the world from one place. We're not all of a sudden omnipresent. Still have emotions. We still seem to be who we are. And the last one, Travis, this is the one that I find the most fascinating, is we still have our memory. They recount these amazing, elaborate stories. But where was the memory of those events stored between the time they experienced it and the time they went back into their body? Right. So all our memory, maybe most of our memory, at least, is not in our body. It's in the immaterial part of our soul, because people don't seem to have trouble recollecting other things when they're in a near-death experience.
Right.
What are your thoughts on this list?
I absolutely love it. I mean, I think that the idea that perception and consciousness and cognitive ability, personal identity, personality, localized existence, emotions, memory. I think that you should add the word will.
Okay. That's a good
personal identity and or personality could kind of refer to the same thing, but the question is, what makes a person? What are the attributes necessary for something to be a person? And classically, people have often said the trifecta of the triple qualities, if you will, of mind, will, and emotion. Those three constitute a person. And classical philosophers have wanted to say things like the following: that while all other attributes that I might possess are grounded in my material functions, like my capacity to breathe is made possible by my lungs, my ability to see is made possible by my eyes, my capacity for walking is made possible by my legs. Okay. Intellect, will, and emotion, while connected to the immaterial, to the material aspects of a human, are not grounded in my physicality.
Just the other day.
Sorry.
That's fine. My capacity for thinking, for example, is connected to my brain. And so my ability to think is obstructed if I experience brain damage. However, the ability to think can be realized apart from the body, and acts of the will can cause bodily parts to move. Okay. So Don Taylor, next week I may read this, but Don Taylor was Bob Marley's manager. And, the movie just came out about Bob Marley where he was shot. Well, Don Taylor took the brunt of those shots. And he actually had an NDE.
Okay.
But it's a weaker version, but I like it. And next week I'll explain, even if every single one of these stories is false, you can actually still prove that you have a soul. Right.
Very good.
But that's what a lot of people do, is they'll say, because the mind uses the brain, it's identical to it.
That's right. And that's a false.
In fact, I misspoke earlier. I said my ability to see is made possible by my eyes, but we know that that's not true. My ability to see can obtain independently of my eyes. So there's something about the human soul that properly grounds even its use of the bodily organs to sense the outside world.
That's right.
And the other thing that I will just say is, why is it that so many people, when they experience brain damage, for example, lose their ability to think? Does that mean that they don't have a soul, or that their soul is dependent upon the brain, or something like that?
No.
And the analogy I would give, and you can hear J.P. Moreland and others give similar analogies. This is not unique, but the specific analogy itself is unique. Eddie Van Halen, I've seen him play guitar so much, and a lot of times when he's on stage, a couple of his guitar springs will break rather, and that limits his ability to play his guitar, because if you have 2 or 3 broken strings, what you can play is going to be limited.
Right.
Now, what's the problem? Is it in Eddie Van Halen, or is it in his guitar?
Yeah, that's
Clearly,
right.
it's in the guitar. Well, what's the problem? My soul or my mind if I experience brain damage? So when you free the soul from the body, it can now operate independently of the brain. So we can't confuse the unity of the mind and the brain with the identity between the two.
That's right. That's very good. Yeah.
So I wish I could say more, but I love this stuff. So thanks for sharing all this.
Yeah, I thought we would do well with this, and we're out of time.
Always.
Well, we'll do this again next week, Travis. Maybe we'll finish it. Maybe there's another one after that. There's a lot of material here.
Tons. God bless you, brother.
All right, brother. It's good to talk to you, and we will talk next week.
Bye-bye.